Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 7th hearing of the 45th sessions of the Permanent People's Tribunal. My name is Khaled Kayali, and on my behalf and on behalf of the Alliance, I welcome you today to this session. Through this session, we want to raise awareness about the human rights violations and impunity in Germany and in the European borders politics. Before Selina elaborates on that and tell you more about this event today, I would like to draw your attention to measurements related to COVID-19. First, the seats are arranged in a way that there is 1 meter between each seat and 1.5 meters between each row. Please try to not move the seats. When sitting, you can remove the face mask, otherwise it should be worn always. Hand sanitizers are placed around the hall. You can find it and feel free to use it. Also, devices for automatic air purifications are distributed in the hall, and it's there to make the air fresh and clean. For speakers and witnesses, please always use this fabric. It's one-time use, and we will try to disinfect the microphone always. If you have any questions, please refer to me or to Selina. She will be here always. Now she will elaborate about the event today and for the next 2 days. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Selina, and together with Khaled, I will guide you through the Berlin Tribunal. And first of all, this Berlin Tribunal, or the Berlin hearing, is truly special because it takes place in the midst of a pandemic, and we are still here, and we still fight against injustice and the human rights violations migrants and refugees have to experience on a daily basis. And also what makes it further special is that today we're not only here and present in this room, but also online. So we have this hybrid format to make this happen today. And I would just say that this Berlin hearing, as Khaled already mentioned, is part of a series of hearings which took place all across Europe. And the Berlin hearing is also part of the 45th session on the human rights violations with impunity migrants and refugee people experienced in Europe and in the context of the European border regime. And with this Berlin Tribunal, we will have 8 different hearings with different thematic focuses covering access to health, the situation on the Greek islands, the criminalization of solidarity, the criminalization and racialization of refugees and migrants, and the topic of migrant workers' rights. And these topics will be presented by organizations who are not only in Germany fighting every day to make this world a better place, but also from organizations who are involved in that fight across Europe. So I will just give you a short overview of what will happen today. So this is the first day, so this will be kind of the introduction to the whole tribunal and to the whole Berlin hearing at all. So first we will give a short introduction, so there will be different welcome speeches and messages from the co-conveners of the Berlin Tribunal. And this will be IPPNW, Borderline Europe, and also our European partners. Also European partners. And then the 45th session will be presented again with a broader focus, also explaining how this Berlin hearing fits in the context of what already happened. And we will also present our jury, which will be essential to this tribunal because they will provide us with the insight and they will give comments, and they will also be kind of a guidance for you who are in front of the in front of your laptop, or in front of your television, or maybe even here in this room. And at last, we will also present our indictment. And then we will actually go into what we aim to do in this tribunal, which is to give space for refugees and migrants to raise their voice, and also for organizations who work to advocate for the rights of migrants and refugees to explain what they do. And we will have two hearings on the access to healthcare in Germany and in Europe, and also a third hearing on the European Union border politics. So yeah, I think now we will start first with the welcome speeches provided via video from IPPNW and Borderline Europe. Thank you.
Good afternoon, dear jurors, dear organizing partners, dear audience. My name is Carlotta Konrad, and I am a member of the German board of IPPNW, the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, and also the Physicians in Social Responsibility. At the moment, I'm still at work at the hospital, but I surely will join the hearing later. Together with the Permanent People's Tribunal and many other old and new partners, we have spent nearly 3 years preparing for this weekend. Within our organization, we have a very active working group of experts and physicians in the field, getting in touch with all different health-wise and medical challenges of migration. We lay, for example, one special focus on children, demanding a decent evaluation of each refugee child and their needs, instead of dangerous and not indicated use of radiation and X-ray to determine the age of the children. Here in Germany, a lot of the support, education and living conditions are attached to the age of the arriving children. We have another focus on the humanitarian consequences of deportation and published a report just at the beginning of this October. It describes the fatal consequences of the situation before, during and after deportation for the health of the individual. It further tells stories of our patients and gives advice to those colleagues engaged in this field. So we as doctors demand and lobby for the rights of migrant and refugee people, as many find themselves in a vulnerable situation. Never should any human be handled as an object or used for any political intention. Second to that, a core theme for the IPPNW is mental health and the identification of treatment required. The challenges these specific needs bring with them every day, and especially during legal processes. For now, we're looking forward to an important and relevant tribunal on the human right of health for migrant and refugee people. We all have lots to learn this weekend, and we need to listen well to the prepared contributions and testimonials. The governments of Europe as well as Germany are the key drivers of these violations of human rights and bound to improve the situation urgently. Having a hearing during this pandemic is something the Alliance made possible, and we are very, very thankful. Thank you to all the human rights and health organizations and self-help organizations for migrants and activists who participate. You show the importance of political advocacy work for all human beings at all time, and the time-critical change that is needed right now. I hope we have a productive weekend, and see you later.
Hallo und herzlich willkommen im Namen von Borderline Europe. Wir sind ein Verein mit Sitz in Berlin, Palermo und Lesbos und leisten mit unserer Arbeit zivilen Widerstand gegen das europäische Grenzregime. Die Vorbereitungen für die Berliner Anhörung des Permanent People's Tribunals unterstützen wir schon von Anfang an. Und dementsprechend freuen wir uns sehr, dass die Anhörung jetzt wirklich stattfinden kann.
Das letzte halbe Jahr hat für alle sichtbar und in einem extremen Ausmaß gezeigt, wie ungleich der Zugang zum Menschenrecht auf Gesundheitsversorgung verteilt ist und wie viele Menschen auch in Deutschland davon ausgeschlossen sind. Die gegenwärtige Politik Deutschlands und der EU tut nichts, um dies zu ändern. Sie setzt im Gegenteil auf Abschreckung, Abschottung und kriminalisiert Flucht und solidarisches Handeln. Das hat direkte Auswirkungen auf die Gesundheit der Flüchtenden. Im schlimmsten Fall bedeutet dies sogar, dass Menschen auf dem Fluchtweg oder nach ihrer Ankunft sterben. Mit dem Tribunal wollen wir zeigen, wie sehr das Recht auf Gesundheit Geflüchteten und Migrantinnen immer wieder verwehrt wird. Die Anhörung an diesem Wochenende soll eine Plattform sein, auf der Betroffene von ihren Erfahrungen berichten können und auf der wir diese Missstände öffentlich anklagen.
Wir freuen uns sehr, dass so viele Gruppen und Einzelpersonen mit dabei sind, aus Deutschland und ganz Europa, und dass das Tribunal so zu einem Ort wird, an dem so viele starke und wichtige Stimmen zusammenkommen. In diesem Sinne wünschen wir euch allen empowernde Tage und hoffen, dass wir auch in Zukunft zusammenarbeiten werden, gegen Menschenrechtsverletzungen und für eine Politik, die sich an und nicht gegen Menschen richtet, für Bewegungsfreiheit für alle Menschen.
Thank you to Borderline Europe. Now we will hear the video messages of our European co-conveners, Jill Pelizaro and Federico Pacheco.
So, good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me well? I think so. Yes, so good afternoon. And first of all, thank you very much for giving me this space and giving me the possibility to give some words before the beginning of this hearing in Berlin. As said, my name is Jill Belisario, and I am here to represent Transnational Migrant Platform in Europe. And first of all, I want to thank the co-conveners and the members of the PPT and the jurors, and especially also the team in Berlin, who has been working really hard that this hearing is organized today in the middle of this pandemic. And most importantly, I want to thank all who have brought their struggles and will present their testimonies during the hearing within this weekend. As migrant and refugee organization, we organize ourselves as protagonists, not only for ourselves, our communities, but also for building an inclusive society in several cities in Europe, of which we belong. From our experience, fundamentally, migration has always been and will always be a part of human development, and consider migration as a form of resistance to the inequalities and exploitative tendencies inherent in global capitalism. From its formation in 2008, Transnational Migrant Platform in Europe has shared a common analysis of inequality, not only as being locked into a lower so-called unskilled low-pay employment or work opportunity, including the second generation, but also an inequality in structural racism, sexism, and in access to fundamental human rights. During its 2016 assembly, the TMP-E and the participating social movements such as Via Campesina, and in other hearings, we have Unite and LAB Union, decided to collaborate in a more long-term strategy that required a sustained approach of intersectionality and cross-community and cross-sector organizing, integrating gender and racial inequality. Furthermore, it was decided to approach the Permanent People's Tribunal to hold the 45th session on the violation with impunity of the human rights of migrants and refugee peoples by European Union and its member states. Although the crisis or the pandemic currently experienced in Europe today affects all peoples, but as migrants and refugee people, we are confronted with Europe's migration policy of necropolitics. During the hearings between, as Khalid and Selina mentioned, sorry, I was distracted. Many testimonies are given about how necropolitics exposed migrants and refugees to death at borders, including policy of pushbacks and aggressive prohibition of sea rescue, and hotspots and camps such as Moria, where people are meant to live in very bad conditions. Testimonies about how migrants and refugees are reduced to precarious conditions and systemically excluded and relegated to work and live in sites without rights. After the hearing of the PPT in its overall judgments, it has concluded that taken together, the immigration and asylum policy and practices of the EU and its member states constitute a total denial of fundamental rights of people and migrants and are veritable crimes against humanity and must be recognized as system crimes. However, despite the COVID era restrictions and longer-term relegation of migrant and refugee peoples to sites without rights, we are encouraged by, for example, this hearing and the different resistance in countrysides, agricultural farms such as in Spain, Italy, and in many cities in Europe, which we have seen the last months, and demands of arising merged with demands for an end to borders and papers for all, regularization now. Although what I want to put forward here, our biggest challenge currently, however, in Europe context, especially within the introduction of the EU Migration Pact, is finding the basis and strategy for convergence towards a sustained Europe-wide campaign that unites various strands of struggle we hold in common, migrants and refugees, and marginalized and impoverished citizens. There are many citizens, individuals, and organizations and movements resisting alongside migrants and refugees in many different capacities, from organizing to standing bail, from advice to speaking out. We hear the voices of resistance just like today, within this weekend, not only testimonies about the violations, but all the voices of resistance and how they are creating trans-border solidarities and collective strategies of survival. But together, I think there is hope. We are making new spaces, just like Melissa, who will also present during this hearing. They are turning the borderlands into sites of constructive and alternative politics to the capitalist regime. We are linking our struggles with struggles addressing extractivism of corporations and the corporate-driven development model in our home countries, and these struggles are also ours for food sovereignty, for climate justice, labor rights in our workplaces, gender and feminist struggles, rejecting racism and Islamophobia. Our members, I think our numbers are growing, and we say together, it is not a crime to migrate and seek refuge, it is a human right. I call for wall must fall, let's globalize hope. Thank you.
Sí, hola. Bueno, en primer lugar, agradecer a todas las personas que han hecho posible la celebración de este evento en estas circunstancias tan complicadas, al Tribunal Permanente de los Pueblos, a los jueces, a la red de apoyo al TPP, a los testigos y las testigos que van a participar en el evento, y sobre todo un agradecimiento especial al grupo de organización en Alemania, que yo creo que ha hecho un gran esfuerzo para lograr que esta sesión tenga lugar en estas circunstancias, como decía. Yo represento a la Via Campesina Europa, hemos estado presentes en esta sesión del Tribunal Permanente de los Pueblos sobre las violaciones de derechos de los migrantes y de los pueblos migrantes desde su inicio en el año 2017. Se han realizado varias audiencias en Palermo, en París, 2 en Barcelona, en Londres, tocando diferentes aspectos como las fronteras exteriores, las fronteras interiores, los derechos laborales de los migrantes, la situación de los niños, de las mujeres, y en este caso vamos a centrarnos en el tema de la salud. En general, hemos venido denunciando en toda esta sesión la situación de violación de derechos de los migrantes, tanto en los países de origen, donde se dan la situación de colonialismo y de acaparamiento y pillaje de los recursos que fuerzan a las poblaciones a emigrar, pero también lo que es la necropolítica y la violación de derechos en el itinerario y en las fronteras, y también cuando las personas inmigrantes llegan a Europa en la situación de discriminación, de segregación y de racismo que tienen que soportar, ¿no? En la última sesión que tuvimos en Bruselas, como se decía, se quedó claro que existe una situación de negación de derechos y lo que denominamos un crimen de sistema que afecta a las poblaciones migrantes. Este año pensábamos a tener una sesión en Túnez, en el mes de marzo, que no se ha podido realizar, en donde queríamos también centrarnos en lo que eran las causas de la migración y la situación en los países de origen, que nos queda pendiente para sucesivas sesiones, ¿no? Yo quería destacar en este momento, en esta situación de pandemia que ha generado una crisis que no es solo sanitaria, sino una crisis social, una crisis económica, política y también cultural, se ha dado una situación interesante, que es que toda la población europea, o gran parte, ha tenido que vivir una situación que los y las migrantes vivimos normalmente. Esa situación de confinamiento y de restricción de los derechos fundamentales o el derecho de circulación, esa situación en que tener que escondernos de la policía o temer que nos controlen, en esa situación de represión que existía, pero está claro que la población migrante ha sufrido aún más las consecuencias de estos confinamientos o de estas crisis que se han generado durante este año. Y constatamos que hay un agravamiento de las condiciones previas que ya digamos, soportaba la población migrante, de la violación de derechos que existía. Desde la Via Campesina hemos analizado la situación y vemos que por una parte hay tres elementos que quería destacar. Por un lado, que ha quedado muy clara el papel que juega la población migrante en Europa, que lleva adelante y saca adelante eso que se llama los sectores esenciales de la producción y de la vida, ¿no? El servicio doméstico, la agricultura, los cuidados, la construcción, el papel relevante que tiene la población migrante, los trabajadores y trabajadoras, e incluso gran parte de ellos trabajadores sin papeles. Se ha visto eso muy claro. Por otra parte, se ha visto que los estados y la Unión Europea, cuando quiere, puede sacar recursos económicos y políticos y sociales, y si de la misma manera que se ha movilizado recursos para salvar vidas del COVID, es posible, y está claro, que se podrían movilizar recursos para salvar vidas de los náufragos en el estrecho, en las fronteras, en los asentamientos. También eso es posible. Pero la respuesta de las administraciones y de los estados europeos no ha ido en el sentido de reconocer derechos, sino por el contrario, que las medidas que se han tomado en tema de regularización de papeles o de derechos laborales, de movimiento, han sido solamente establecidas en base a un concepto utilitarista del migrante como mano de obra, como recurso, y así, si había que trasladar trabajadores rumanos a Alemania y había que saltarse medidas de seguridad, pues se hacía, y si había que retener gente en las fronteras y regularizar de una manera, dar papeles para que puedan trabajar en un determinado sector, se hacía, pero en ningún caso ha habido un reconocimiento general o un cambio estructural, un reconocimiento de derechos a los papeles, a los derechos laborales y derechos sociales. Esta sesión se realiza en Alemania en un momento importante de lo que es la presidencia alemana de la Unión Europea. ¿Cuál ha sido la respuesta de la Unión Europea a esta situación? Y el último caso más sangrante, que ha sido el incendio en el campamento de Moria, en el asentamiento, ha sido bajo un lenguaje pretendidamente humanista. Lo que ha sido es plantearnos este nuevo pacto europeo por la migración y el asilo, que va en la línea del Global Compact que se planteaba en la ONU, que simplemente lo que viene es a reforzar esta política de segregación, de control, de represión hacia el migrante, de limitación de derechos, con una solidaridad entre los estados, pero es colaboración entre los estados europeos para seguir aplicando esta política de restricción de derechos y facilitar a través de un mayor control de la población, de la utilización de la tecnología en ese sentido, un control para limitar el movimiento, para encerrar a las personas y para expulsarlas en el caso que es necesario. Y también viene a reforzar la colaboración con los países terceros, con los países africanos, asiáticos, americanos, en el sentido de garantizar no el reconocimiento de sus derechos en sus países de orígenes o mejorar la situación de los migrantes, sino para facilitar la identificación, el control y la expulsión a sus países de origen. Entonces, quería finalizar esto con decir, bueno, desde los movimientos sociales apoyamos esta celebración, estas sesiones del Tribunal Permanente de los Pueblos, porque creemos que las resoluciones y los análisis que aquí se hacen son un instrumento fundamental, no solo para la difusión de una realidad que existe, sino también para la concienciación de la población sobre esta realidad que decíamos de negación de derechos y de crimen de sistema contra los pueblos migrantes, sino también que es un instrumento para nuestras luchas, para nuestra organización de alianzas y, como se decía, para la resistencia que ya están realizando las personas migrantes y que tenemos que realizar como movimiento organizado. En ese sentido, ya en Marrakech habíamos planteado que frente al Global Compact, que frente a los pactos europeos, nosotros proponíamos un pacto mundial de solidaridad y de derechos de los migrantes. Yo creo que ese es el camino y bueno, y deseo un buen trabajo en estos 3 días de sesiones del Tribunal Permanente de los Pueblos y yo creo que vamos a salir más reforzados en argumento, en actitud y en motivación para seguir adelante con nuestra resistencia. Muchas gracias.
Thank you for this input. Now we will listen to Via Campesina, the president of the Permanent People Tribunal, and also to Gianni Tignoni, the Secretary General. Thank you.
Can you hear me? Okay. Again, sorry to anticipate what Luciana, I think, was important to say in order to give a broader framework for the work of the Permanent People Tribunal. But I will try to say something, try not to repeat too much what has been said before by Jill and Federico of Via Campesina and the TNI on the previous sessions. My purpose is not to summarize what has been the work of the tribunal so far in the migrants, all the procedures and the documents and testimonies which have been produced over the last 3 years, more or less, and in 5 sessions, are obviously available both in the site of the tribunal, hopefully also in the use of the movements. And then it is important to maintain the idea that we are in a process of a tribunal. We are not here judging one piece after another of a complex situation. We are trying to accompany a historical process, which is in fact an historical process which certainly has as a center on one side as victims or declared victims, migrants and refugees, but is an historical process which has to do possibly even more with the identity of Europe. And Europe in the sense of being the region of the world where formally human rights or people rights should be formally respected because legislation and constitutions appear to be or appeared to be more open to a policy of reception, recognition of the others. Now, what has been documented in the 5 or 6 sections, depending on whether we include Brussels, has been in fact that there has been a critical transformation from the point of view of what could be seen in the tribunal, but also in the historical facts. And in the juridical facts, Federico mentioned before Marrakesh, and then now the Global Compact, the European, or the Pact, the European Pact, no changes. It seems that there is on one side facts which are occupying dramatically the chronicles with tens of hundreds of people who are dying or are expelled or are suffering. On the other side, with a completely different rhythm, a series of documents which are produced and they are repeating themselves. With respect to something which is happening tragically and which is seen as a real threat to the human sense of life, there is a practical immobility of society in terms of looking for solution. Now, this incapacity or indifference or unwillingness of the international community to face a historical crisis with a design is possibly the most dramatic common denominator of what has been happening. And I will try to summarize briefly in three characteristics of this evolution. The previous speaker have mentioned a term which has been used since the beginning in the first opening session of the Tribunal in Barcelona in 2017, a necropolitics. The term is synthetic. It says a politics which is producing death or is in fact expressed simply in a counting of death. Migration has more or less a COVID contagion. The COVID pandemic is a necropolitics. Nothing is done. The only thing which happens is the counting of dead people in different countries. No remedies except locking down, like for migration in concentration camps. There is something which is happening. It's a kind of virus which is contaminating Europe, and necropolitics says virus must be killed if possible. The COVID-19 cannot be killed, migrant, yes. It's simply because you don't need to kill them. You leave them dying. It's enough to be those who are not responding to their requests or needs, and in one way or another they are disappearing or dying. In the death, in the desert, disease, or they are disappearing. And it's interesting what has been happening in these days also in the Mediterranean. Italy is dealing with Libya for the treaties, and there they say, no, we have agreed with the approval of Europe to have the Libyan Coast Guard responsible for that. Now it has been discovered or shown that the Coast Guard is in fact under the control of Erdogan, because the Erdogan military police is in fact controlling the Libyan Coast Guard, which gives the idea that in fact the situation is totally out of any reasonable or expected control. So necropolitics has been and appeared to be in 2017 already in the opening of the tribunal a term which was at least symbolically synthetic of what was happening. What I think has been happening is in fact that the necropolitics as something which is acute has been transformed progressively in a normal policy, in the sense that all the sessions, we have here the Philippe Texier, who is the president of the tribunal, was presiding also the session in Paris, which was the second session after Palermo. He was also in Palermo as one of the protagonists. And the comparison of two countries was progressively showing that, in fact, the problem was no more for migrants. Migrants were everywhere. Somebody who was representing something which was, a body which was occupying a non-due space in the society. And the differences in the politics of Europe was in fact simply a matter of frontiers. The Mediterranean was more for Italy, the Alps were more for France, but the way of using the constitution or their responsibility with respect to Europe was absolutely similar. Migrant should not be a problem. The critical attitude of Europe was we have to do everything to make the migrants not a problem. And that is, in fact, what was clearly evident also in the English session, where there was also a background we have to listen, and also during this session, a kind of we don't need to do anything. What we have to do is to create an hostile environment for migrants. That's enough. If we declare that they are enemies, then this society is producing antibodies, is producing violence, and the states are producing violent responses. So the years of since 2017 or 16, as has been said, has been years where, in fact, migrants were seen as a kind of part of the chronicle, whatever was happening. Sometimes there was something more tragic than something else. There was some, event which was more dramatic when you have children or something like that. And it could be that in one Greek island could have also a disaster like the recent one, which was disturbing the chronicle because it was too heavy to be hidden in the chronicle. It's interesting to see that if you see Europe confronted with the COVID-19 crisis, the migrants disappeared. During the months of the lockdown, everything, no chronicle of migration. The migrants disappeared from any newspaper, any chronicle. They were coming, they were invading, but in fact, it was so good to have another emergency to make them simply disappear. Certainly, we are saying they have tried also to transform migrants and refugees is a further evil or risk for the European population without succeeding too much because migrants were not so old and in refugees to die too much. So they were not making any chronicle. But that is really something which we have to look now, because also this session is looking for the health right, and health right, it has been seen also with the COVID problem, is not simply access to one drug or another. For COVID, there are no rights because we have no drugs for COVID, and therefore what is the medicine for COVID? What is the medicine for migrants? Migrants must be locked down in whatever way. They have really not to be, in fact, part of the history of Europe. They must be confined in whatever mean, juridically, politically, physically, and Europe does not have a specific space for them, except in the planning, general planning, possibly declaration of the head of the European Commission, those claims which are then practically downplayed when you have to make some decision. Now, what is the challenge? And I try not to go so long. I hope that Luciano also will be ready. But the point I was making is that what was the claim of the tribunal, and is even more now the claim because of what has been happening over the years. The claim of the tribunal since the first session in Palermo was, as Federico was saying, look, say, the problem is not to condemn on who to condemn. The facts are so clear. They are simply documenting that we do not have a tool for providing an answer, which is simply not a recognition that there is a kind of ongoing, slowly burning genocide, as has been said in various situations. Now, the problem is that genocide is something which has to do with people, migrants, what they need in order to have any chance in the future to be recognized is not to be a sum of individuals or groups coming from different exiles, environment, poverty, war. We have to recognize that, I don't know whether I am juridically correct, but symbolically, and it has been said already in the first session, it is more or less like in the time of the fights against slavery. I could say, I think that we have to imagine today in the global world that these transversal people represent as a people, migrants, refugees, as a reality which is different, more or less what has been the identity and the role of liberation movements from colonial powers. The fact of recalling, underlining that a global world has to do with different definition of people, different definition of rights, different definition of citizenship, different definition of what is the translation of globalization, not simply in terms of concentration of richness, power in few hands, but globalization as a tool for universalizing democracy. Migrants are those who are recalling that priority to Europe. Europe is deaf to that sense, because we are developing on the opposite side more nationalisms. In a global society, we are imploding ourselves, and in that implosion, obviously, we do not have a space for thinking of migrants. It's difficult in the Chronicle of Europe to have an imagination of a different way of being together in so different situations. It's different to imagine a different way of organizing labor. It's different to imagine something which has to do with school, with anything. Nothing has been done, despite the many promises also for the COVID epidemic or pandemic. And the same is true for migrants. From time to time, some counting of the bodies, COVID or migrants, it's more or less the same. How many are the deaths in excess in a society? And each day we have, in Paris or in France, we have 40,000 in excess. In Italy, 25,000, the other side. It's just kind of really, we are spectator of something for which we do not have an immediate answer, and therefore we could easily simply forget or making them disappearing. Now, I think that this problem is critical. As I said before, it is critical not only for the migrants and refugees, different way the session in UK was very clear together with that in Paris, in putting to evidence the strict continuity and the complementarity of migrants and refugees, but on the platform of considering one people who needs to have a different space in a global society, irrespective of language and ethnic and something like that. If we are now in a closing section of this process, we are also at the beginning of another process, because I think that once the Permanent People Tribunal has tried to show, and possibly has shown, that international law, European law, are unwilling to take the problem, and that the migrant people is a people of like a liberation movement, we have to try to really support strongly a real political, cultural, juridical fight, medium, long term. Is not an easy fight. It's something which is forbidden by our society. And the way you're maintaining the visibility, which is the first way of restituting really to people their identity, to be visible, to have a habeas corpus which is real and not simply declared, I think that is the first duty for the future. And I think that the fact of having health and welfare as one of the critical issue for Germany, a very rich country, a model country for so many things, is interesting because health is not, and the COVID-19 has clearly shown, health does not exist as a separate entity. Health is one of the name of life. If you do not have life in dignity, health is a minor variable. Virchow, a German scientist, was saying that medicine at the end is a politics made with social means. And in fact, it's what has to say. Health is an indicator of the capacity of recognizing human rights in each individual, no one excluded. And I think that is the main message of this important session, which concludes a process, to open a process which is really a process of individual and people right, because that is the future of the migrants and of the tribunal. Thanks for your patience, possibly.
So thank you to Gianni Tognoni to your intervention. I would like to remember that Gianni is Secretary General of the Permanent People Tribunal since its establishment in 1979. I'm wondering if Luciana is ready?
Yes, finally.
Okay, we are very happy to see you and to listen to you.
And perhaps they thought I was a migrant, you see, and so the screen told me all the time that I was not accepted, but finally I have been accepted. And I must confess that I am very moved to open a session of this tribunal in Berlin, although of course, I'm not there with my body, but I feel like if I have been, I will be there. Because Berlin is for our People's Rights Tribunal a very important town. It was there in Berlin that in 1988 we held a very important session. It was the first time that we charged not single governments of single countries, as we had done before, Brazil dictatorship or Argentina and so on, but two very important international institutions, the IPPNW and the World Bank, which never had thought that they could charge like a person. Both were holding their summit in Berlin, and we held the so-called session in the same town and at the same time. So for 2-3 days, Berlin was all concerned with these two institutions. And the Freie Universität was hosting the event, and due to the cooperation of Elmar Haltvater, I would love that all of us will remember here. Elmar Haltvater gave us the opportunity to hold the session at the Freie Universität of Berlin, and then remained a very important person in the tribunal and in the work of the Basso Foundation, of whom was even vice president. And his death a few years ago has been, I think, a great loss for all of us, for everybody, for everyone who is committed with people's rights. So our session of 88, I have to remember it because it was just 1 year before the fall of the wall. And I still remember how many troubles we had, because we had many participants who were arriving at the airport of East Germany, and we had a lot of problems because to receive them, to come across the border and so on. The opening session was attended by 2,000 young people who were filling the hall. And the whole town was involved. I remember the taxi drivers who, when they took us at this place, they asked, what's happening? What are you doing? And so on. And among the witnesses, we had many that at that time were completely unknown. And afterwards became key persons of the movement and of our activity. I will remember Vandana Shiva. None of us had ever heard of her, but she was working in the World Bank as a functionary, and she had just abandoned the World Bank because she was horrified of what they were doing in her own country, in India. And she came to witness what the situation is. We had somebody like Mercadante, who was at that time a member, a militant of the PT, of the Brazilian People's Party, but then became a minister a few years later of the Lula government. And then we had, I just want to mention them, Katarina Focke, which had been minister in the Brandt government, and several members of parliaments, Weiskirchen, SPD, and so on. And we had somebody who also became very known afterwards, Triffin, the economist, who was there just, how to say, he was witnessing for the bank and for the IMF, but of course, it was just to explain us the way they were working. And he was aware of how bad they were, both behaving. And then I hope that, I think I asked Gianni if you have ever translated into English and distributed the speech of Eduardo Galeano, wonderful speech of Galeano at the very end, which I think remains one of the most important documents of the activity of the tribunal. And of course, I tell you all this because it's the beginning of the story of a different target. The institution, the economical institution. And this is the beginning of the story of the movements we were fighting against them. But people at the time, they didn't even know IMF and World Bank. You know, now it seems funny. But at that time, dictatorship, of course, we fight against dictatorship, but not on this. And the result, I would say, of the session of Berlin was that the public opinion finally got aware of the importance of these international institutions, and is the beginning of a time, the 90s, where very strong movements started to develop their activity all over the world, which helped building awareness about the role of them and about the new target in a global situation. Defines the, remember only this, then after IMF and World Bank, we found out GATT and the World Trade Organization and the OXE. Remember that the fight in 99 in Seattle against the AMI, which is the Agreement on Investments, the cover of the Time magazine was dedicated to it. And the title was The First World Guerrilla Online. And Porto Alegre afterwards, and the No Global, and so on and so on. And I say this because one may think, by God, in any case, we will not be able to bring in jail, although they are so guilty, our enemies, those who are violating all the rights, all the laws, all the constitutions and all principles. But, and think that what we do is therefore not vital. But our role is, and this history proves it, so important because it helps bringing people aware of what the situation is, and to open the eyes of many who shut their eyes still. And this gives strength to those who have to fight against these violations and against the horrible things which are happening in our world. And the issue of the migrants is one of the most dramatic we have ever faced, I think. And it's a very complex issue because the power, as usual, has been able to produce a conflict among the poor, as it always did, as we know. Poor citizens against poor migrants, and the attempt to convince the poorest that the cause of their misery are today the migrants. Our tribunal will have help denouncing these lies and give strength to the movements. European Union maybe also to open the eyes to the European Union. I'm quite skeptic about that, although I think that in the last time the European Union has taken good positions, but on the migrants, there is no way. It didn't want to understand, or I cannot think that they did not understand. Nobody can forget, ignore what's happening, but the eyes and the ears are shuttered. So I think that what it has to be understood that we entered a new historical time.
Sorry, Luciana, to interrupt you. You have just 1 minute to...
1 minute, I don't need the minute. I say that we have, if we have globalization, which means that capitals, goods, everything moves, you cannot forbid humans to do the same. And migration has to become normal. It's not just because the wars, the climate, everything, is that we have to understand that we enter a historical stage in which humans, if there is globalization, humans move from one place to another. Nomads, to be a nomad, it's a normal situation now. It's not an exception. And good or bad, we have to reason in this way. And if we don't find a positive solution to this problem, what we will have is violence, it's rebellion, and it will be dramatic also for those who are not migrants, but citizens of the country to have to accept them. I am optimistic because I know that in these last times there are a lot of activity by young people, the boats in the Mediterranean, of Germany, of Italy, or Spain, of every country who is trying to save the people in the sea, and lots of young people who are very active in trying to help. So I am optimistic, but I think we have to really convince people that there are two possibilities. Either we understand, or we have to drop the atomic bomb in the Mediterranean. This is the choice, and they have to understand this, which is a very dramatic choice for everybody, of course. Thank you.
So thank you, Luciana Castellina. Luciana is the president, member of the Permanent People Tribunal, is the president of the panel of the judges for this session. Time runs very fast, so we have to go ahead with the presentation of the panel of the other members of the panel of the judges. And I will ask them, each of them, to present their self. The first speaker is Philippe Texier. So please, Philippe, unmute your microphone and present yourself.
Bien, je serai très bref, simplement d'abord souhaiter la bienvenue à tout le monde et surtout indiquer à quel point je suis ravi de participer, même si c'est de très loin, à ce tribunal. Je me sens comme étant à Berlin avec vous. Une présentation un peu de qui je suis. Vous avez tous reçu les fiches, mais en quelques mots, dire que j'ai été magistrat pendant 40 ans, jusqu'à la Cour de cassation en France, et que parallèlement, j'ai été un militant de toujours des droits de l'homme et des droits des peuples. Entre autres, j'ai été 25 ans au Comité des droits économiques, sociaux et culturels à l'ONU, à un moment où les droits économiques étaient relativement contestés par rapport aux droits civils et politiques. Je pense qu'ils continuent à l'être d'ailleurs et qu'ils n'ont pas toujours le même statut que les droits civils et politiques. Et puis, j'ai participé notamment à une mission de paix au Salvador. J'étais au Salvador au moment où les accords de guerre, de paix plus exactement, se sont signés. J'y suis arrivé un peu avant la signature et j'y suis resté encore quelques temps en dirigeant la division des droits de l'homme. Et depuis, je suis de plus ou moins loin beaucoup de processus de paix, dont l'un me préoccupe particulièrement actuellement, c'est celui de Colombie, bien que les accords aient été signés depuis maintenant 4 ans. Certaines formes de violence ciblées continuent en Colombie contre les défenseurs des droits de l'homme, contre des paysans, contre des leaders syndicaux, etc. etc. Donc voilà, je ne m'étendrai pas plus longtemps. Je vous invite à regarder le curriculum vitae qui est indiqué. Simplement, je suivrai avec beaucoup d'attention les débats et j'espère pouvoir y participer. Et donc, bienvenue à tous et que cette session qui est la suite d'une longue session qui avait commencé à Barcelone, poursuivie à Palerme, à Paris et à Bruxelles, permette d'améliorer et de mieux faire comprendre cette question des migrants, du peuple des migrants. Bienvenue encore et je laisse la parole au suivant.
Thank you, Felipe. Now, Teresa Almeida Cravo from Portugal.
Thank you, Simona. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Teresa Almeida Cravo. I'm an assistant professor in international relations at the Faculty of Economics of the University of Coimbra and a researcher at the Centre for Social Studies in Portugal. I teach and conduct research on topics such as peace and violence, security and development, and global interventionism from a very critical perspective. I've had the pleasure of participating in the Barcelona PPT hearing. I'm truly honored to be a member of this jury and to be part of this very important work of solidarity. And I humbly thank all of those willing to provide their testimonies in this hearing and all of those that have worked so hard to make this issue brought to our attention and their voices heard. Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa. I will give the online floor to Leah Bassel from UK.
Very much. My name is Leah Bassel. My pronouns are she and her, and I am here as someone involved in local campaigns for dignity and respect of migrants and refugees in the London Borough of Haringey. I also had the honor of being a juror in the London hearing. And in my work, I'm a professor of sociology, researching the activism of women of color, migration and intersectionality. And I wanted also to extend my thanks to the organizers because it's amazing that you've brought us here together and that you're holding us here together in this way. And to just pick up on something that Jill said earlier about uniting various strands of struggle, it's really an honor and a responsibility to be here as a juror, to be here as a white, very privileged person, and to have this opportunity to work in solidarity with connected and overlapping groups, Black people, people of color, migrants, and refugees. So thank you, and I look forward to our work together.
Thank you, Leah. And now is the time for the presentation of Marina Forti from Italy.
Thank you. Good afternoon to everyone. I'm very glad to be here, although virtually, of course. I am a journalist. I focused on migration when this was a very new reality in Italy 20, 30 years ago. I worked on many other issues, of course. I worked as a correspondent in South Asia and elsewhere. I focus on exploitation of natural resources and how these create misery all over the world. And this is part of what we are discussing in this session. But to make it brief, I worked with the TPP before, and I'm very glad and very grateful, first of all, to the Tribunal and to all of the organizers who succeeded in bringing us together, although not in presence, although virtually, but this simply add to the complication, I imagine. So thank you for this. Thank you to everyone who is coming in these days to bring their testimonies. Thanks to all of you. I'm very honored to be here and very glad to be here with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Marina. I will give the floor to Domenico Gallo from Italy.
Good afternoon to everybody. My name is Domenico Gallo. I'm president in the Supreme Court of Cassazione of Italy. I was engaged in Magistratura Democratica. It is an association of magistrates committed to the defense of human rights, especially the rights of migrants. I attended the session of the Permanent People's Tribunal on Turkey and Kurds. As Magistratura Democratica, we promoted last year in November in Lampedusa a conference of magistrates, jurists, and journalists on the issue, the frontier of the law of the frontier. The question is much debated in Italy because the former interior minister was charged with kidnapping for preventing the disembarkation of migrants recovered at sea from Coast Guard ships and NGO ships. And now he is currently on trial before the courts of Palermo and Catania. And I am very honored to participate to this session. Thank you very much to everybody.
Thanks, Domenico. So I think that we have finished the online presentation and introduction of the panel of the judges. There were 3 members of this panel coming from Germany and present in the Berlin session. So I will give them the real floor of this session and for the presentation and introduction of Kira Kosnik, Sarah Lincoln, and Ahmed Said. I'm sorry and I apologize for my pronunciation. Thank you very much.
So my name is Kira Kosnik, and I'm a professor of cultural and social anthropology at the Europa University Viadrina, which is in a small town on the German-Polish border, not too far from Berlin. And I've been working and teaching on European migration regimes and migration in the context of global inequalities for the past 20 years. And I have a special interest also in questions of intersectionality, that is addressing questions of racism, sexism, and also homophobia and transphobia, not as separate problems, but as interlinked. I'm taking part here for the very first time, and I'm very honored to be here. Thank you for having me.
Good afternoon. My name's Sarah Lincoln. I'm a human rights lawyer at Gesellschaft für Freiheitsrechte, short GFF. So GFF is a Berlin-based NGO specialized in strategic litigation for human rights. And one of my thematic focuses at GFF is working on cases around social rights and migrants' rights. Before I joined GFF, I worked as human rights officer at Bread for the World for many years, where I focused on litigating and making known cases of human rights abuses by transnational companies. I'm honored to be part of the jury this weekend, and I'm looking forward to hearing the testimonies of human rights violations in the context of the right to health and migration.
Hello, everybody. First of all, I want to thank you all, the organizers and the people who are participating and contributed to this event. I'm so glad and honored to be here. My name is Ahmed Saeed. I'm an Egyptian, anti-authoritarian leftist and human rights defender. I'm the coordinator of human rights of Egyptian Commission for Rights and Freedoms in Germany, and co-founder and executive manager of Open Data Bank. It's a Berlin-based NGO. I have shared in the Egyptian revolution as a political activist and as a physician. So I have been involved in organizing the field hospitals in the Tahrir Square, trying to provide health care for the injured protesters. Thank you for being here and thank you for having me here.
Thank you to all the jurors in present and online for presenting themselves and also to give us an insight into their work and their expertise. So now we will continue with our first point, the opening. And now we're going on with one point, which is probably one of the most important of the whole tribunal, our indictment. And Suzanne Deer, the social responsibility referent from IPPNW, will read out a shortened version of our indictment now in German. So if you need translation, you should use the Zoom account the Zoom link that might be sent to you, and if not, you can come to me or write an email. Thank you.
In dieser Anhörung rufen wir das Permanent People's Tribunal dazu auf, sorgfältig zu prüfen, ob die gegenwärtige Migrations- und Asylpolitik der Bundesrepublik Deutschland und der EU das Recht auf Gesundheit und körperliche und seelische Unversehrtheit von Migrantinnen und Geflüchteten verletzt. Ob sie im Besonderen gegen die Artikel der Allgemeinen Erklärung der Rechte der Völker, unterzeichnet in Algier, im Jahr 1976 verstößt. Ob sie die Rechte des Individuums schwerwiegend verletzt, wie sie in der Allgemeinen Erklärung der Menschenrechte von 1948 festgehalten sind. Und ob und inwieweit diese Rechtsverletzungen in ihrer Gesamtheit den Tatbestand eines Verbrechens gegen die Menschlichkeit erfüllen, wie er in Artikel 7 des Römischen Statuts definiert ist. Die Angeklagten zu dieser Anklageschrift sind die Europäische Union im Besonderen, Ursula von der Leyen vertretend für die EU-Kommission, der Rat der Europäischen Union mit Deutschland als Vorsitz, die Europäische Agentur Frontex sowie die Regierung der Bundesrepublik Deutschland in eigenem Recht und als Mitglied der Europäischen Union und als Vertreter des globalen Nordens und die Regierungen der Bundesländer. Im Besonderen Horst Seehofer, stellvertretend für das Bundesministerium des Inneren für Bau und Heimat, Hubertus Heil, stellvertretend für das Bundesministerium für Arbeit und Soziales, Jens Spahn, stellvertretend für das Bundesministerium für Gesundheit, sowie Gerd Müller, stellvertretend für das Bundesministerium für wirtschaftliche Zusammenarbeit und Entwicklung. Die vorliegende Anklageschrift ist Teil einer Reihe von Anklageschriften gegen die Regierungen der EU-Mitgliedstaaten und Institutionen der EU. Sie beruhen auf einem allgemeinen Rahmendokument, welches in der Auftaktanhörung des Permanent Peoples Tribunals zu Human Rights of Migrant and Refugee Peoples in Barcelona im Juli 2017 entwickelt wurde. Diese Anklageschriften zeigen zusammengenommen auf, wie die Regierungen des globalen Nordens und die Institutionen der EU Bedingungen geschaffen haben, unter denen Millionen von Menschen im globalen Süden die Lebensgrundlage entzogen und diese somit zur Migration gezwungen werden. Die in den globalen Norden migriert sind, als Nichtpersonen behandeln, indem sie ihnen Rechte verwehren, welche allen Menschen auf Grundlage ihrer gemeinsamen Menschlichkeit zustehen, einschließlich der Rechte auf Leben, Menschenwürde und Freiheit, und welche in der Praxis rechtsfreie Räume in Bezug auf Rechtsstaatlichkeit und Menschenrechte im globalen Norden geschaffen haben. Im Allgemeinen stellen illegalisierte MigrantInnen und Geflüchtete besonders vulnerable Personengruppen dar, die systematische Verletzungen ihres Rechts auf Gesundheit und körperliche und seelische Unversehrtheit erfahren. Bereits vor und während der Migration sind sie mit Krieg oder bewaffneten Konflikten, Menschenrechtsverletzungen, traumatischen Verlusten sowie Klimawandel, Enteignung oder Vertreibung konfrontiert, die durch ein System der globalen Ausbeutung bedingt werden. Dieses System wird durch eine Arbeits- und Migrationspolitik getragen, die die Bewegungsfreiheit von Kapital und Bürgern des globalen Nordens favorisiert, während Menschen aus dem globalen Süden diese Freiheit verwehrt bleibt. MigrantInnen und Geflüchtete werden zu einer Klasse von illegalisierten sowie repressiver und rassistischer Politik und Praxis ausgesetzt. Aufgrund ihrer gemeinsamen Erfahrungen in Hinsicht auf Unterdrückung und Repressionen kann gesagt werden, dass Migrantinnen und Geflüchtete ein People, also ein Volk, im Sinne der Allgemeinen Erklärung der Rechte der Völker, also die Erklärung von Algier, bilden. Diese besagt, dass jedes Volk ein Recht auf Existenz hat und dass niemand aufgrund seiner oder ihrer nationalen oder kulturellen Identität Verfolgung, Deportation, Vertreibung oder Lebensbedingungen ausgesetzt sein darf, die die Identität oder Integrität beeinträchtigen können. Im Rahmen des sogenannten europäischen Asylsystems, das Menschen gewährt wird, die vor Verfolgung oder schweren Schaden in ihrem eigenen Land fliehen und daher internationalen Schutz benötigen, klagen wir Menschenrechtsverletzungen in folgenden Bereichen an. Erstens, der Zugang zur Gesundheitsversorgung. Zweitens, Auswirkungen der Lebensverhältnisse in Massenunterkünften auf die psychische und physische Gesundheit. Drittens, Aufenthaltsstatus, Abschiebung und Gesundheit. Viertens, die Kriminalisierung von Solidarität. Fünftens, Deutschlands Verantwortung in der EU-Abschottungspolitik. Sowie sechstens, Rassifizierung und Kriminalisierung von Migrantinnen und Geflüchteten. Die einzelnen Anklagepunkte gegen die Landesregierung und Bundesregierung als solche und als Vertreterin der EU und der EU-Mitgliedstaaten sowie als Repräsentantin des globalen Nordens sind folgende. Asyl ist ein Grundrecht. Die Gewährung von Asyl ist eine internationale Verpflichtung, die erstmals in der Genfer Flüchtlingskonvention von 1951 anerkannt wurde. In der EU, einem Raum offener Grenzen und der Bewegungsfreiheit, teilen die Länder die gleichen Grundwerte und die Staaten müssen einen gemeinsamen Ansatz verfolgen, um hohe Schutzstandards für Geflüchtete zu gewährleisten. Die sich daraus ergebenden Verfahren müssen in der gesamten EU fair, wirksam und gegen Missbrauch geschützt sein. In diesem Sinne haben sich die EU-Staaten verpflichtet, ein gemeinsames europäisches Asylsystem einzurichten. Der Zuzug von Asylsuchenden ist weder konstant noch gleichmäßig über die EU verteilt. Asyl darf deshalb keine Lotterie sein. Die EU-Mitgliedstaaten sind gemeinsam dafür verantwortlich, Asylsuchende in Würde aufzunehmen und sicherzustellen, dass sie fair behandelt werden und dass ihr Fall nach einheitlichen Standards geprüft wird, sodass unabhängig davon, wo Asylsuchende ihren Antrag stellen, das ergeblich ähnlich ausfallen wird. Seit 1999 arbeitet die EU daran, ein gemeinsames europäisches Asylsystem, genannt GEAS, zu schaffen und den derzeitigen Rechtsrahmen zu verbessern. Zwischen 1999 und 2005 wurden mehrere Legislativmaßnahmen zur Harmonisierung der gemeinsamen Mindeststandards für Asyl vorgenommen. Wichtig war auch die Stärkung der finanziellen Solidarität mit der Schaffung des Europäischen Flüchtlingsfonds. Im Jahr 2001 ermöglichte die Richtlinie zum vorübergehenden Schutz als eine gemeinsame Reaktion der EU einen starken Zuzug von Vertriebenen, die nicht ihr Herkunftsland zurückkehren konnten. Die Richtlinie zur Familienzusammenführung gilt auch für Geflüchtete. Erstens. Mit einem Asylsystem, welches auf der Idee der Verteidigung der Festung Europa basiert, missbraucht die deutsche Regierung weiterhin ihre Macht und ihr geografisches Privileg, durch Migrantinnen und Geflüchtete ihrer sozialen Menschenrechte beraubt werden, insbesondere ihrer Rechte auf Gesundheit, auf soziale Sicherheit und auf angemessenen Wohnraum. Zweitens. Im Rahmen einer Politik, die sich ausschließlich auf den Abbau von Anreizen und die wissenschaftlich falsche Idee der Abschaffung sogenannter Pull-Faktoren für Migration konzentriert, hat die deutsche Regierung dafür gesorgt, dass Migrantinnen und Geflüchtete weiterhin marginalisiert und ihrer sozialen Menschenrechte beraubt bleiben, insbesondere ihrer Rechte auf Gesundheit, soziale Sicherheit und angemessenem Wohnraum. Drittens. Die Einwanderungs- und Asylpolitik der Regierung fördert Rassismus, Islamophobie und Nationalismus und hat bewusst ein feindliches Umfeld für Nicht-StaatsbürgerInnen geschaffen, welches Armut fördert, Recht auf Wohnraum und medizinischer Grundversorgung verwehrt, sowie unbefristete Haft und Abschiebungen beinhaltet. Diese Politik verstößt gegen internationale Menschenrechtsverpflichtungen zum Schutz der Rechte auf Leben, Gesundheit, einer angemessenen Unterkunft, Würde, die physische und psychische Unversehrtheit, die Achtung des Privat- und Familienlebens, der Freiheit und Schutz vor Zwangsarbeit und unmenschlicher und erniedrigender Behandlung. Viertens. Die Regierung erschafft durch ihre Politik Bedingungen, insbesondere durch eine unzureichende Gesundheitsversorgung, die es unmöglich machen, ohne Arbeit zu leben. Zugleich wird die Erwerbsarbeit für bestimmte Bevölkerungsgruppen illegalisiert, wodurch sie aus ihrer besonders vulnerablen Position heraus gezwungen sind, ausbeuterischen Arbeitsverhältnissen unter besonders prekären Arbeitsbedingungen nachzugehen, von denen wiederum die Privatwirtschaft profitiert. Fünftens. Während das EU-Freizügigkeitsrecht die Bedeutung der Familienzusammenführung für BürgerInnen des europäischen Wirtschaftsraums, also EWR, die für die Arbeit ins europäische Ausland umziehen, anerkennt, sind die Bedingungen zur Familienzusammenführung für Nicht-EWR-BürgerInnen, unabhängig davon, ob sie als Arbeitnehmerinnen oder als Geflüchtete zugelassen sind, äußerst restriktiv und führen zu einer langfristigen Trennung von Familien. Sechstens. Diese Politik wirkt sich nachteilig auf die Rechte von Kindern aus. Sie sind dem Risiko von Ausbeutung und Missbrauch ausgesetzt, wenn sie versuchen, aus ihrem eigenen Recht heraus zu migrieren oder laufen Gefahr, Not und Armut ausgesetzt zu sein, als Folge einer Politik, die migrantisierten Familien keine Unterstützung aus öffentlichen Mitteln gewährt. Siebtens. Die Regierung erzielt in ihrem eigenen Recht und als EU-Mitgliedsstaat ökonomische Gewinne aus Verträgen mit Sicherheitskonzernen für das Grenzüberwachungssystem sowie aus der Unterbringung von Asylsuchenden und der Inhaftierung und Abschiebung von MigrantInnen. Zugleich werden Brutalität, Rassismus und andere Menschenrechtsverletzungen Straftaten, Betrug und Fahrlässigkeit, welche von staatlichen Akteuren begangen werden und denen Migrantinnen und Geflüchtete ausgesetzt sind, übersehen oder geduldet oder durch die fortgesetzte Vergabe von Verträgen entlohnt. Deshalb sind unsere Fragen an das Tribunal. Das Tribunal wird gebeten, die kumulative Wirkung dieser Maßnahmen, Politiken und Operationen zusammen zu betrachten, die dazu dienen, ein Volk ohne Rechte innerhalb Europas und an seinen Grenzen zu schaffen und zu erhalten. Deshalb erstens: Sofern das Tribunal die oben genannten Verletzungen für erwiesen hält, wie fügen sie sich in das allgemeine Muster der Verletzungen ein, die das Tribunal bei seinen Anhörungen in Rom, Barcelona, Palermo, London, Paris und Brüssel festgestellt hat? Zweitens: Wie verträgt sich die Schaffung und Aufrechterhaltung eines rechtlosen Volkes mit dem Anspruch Europas, eine Wiege der universellen Menschenrechte und Werte zu sein und mit den von den europäischen Staaten verfassten, unterzeichneten und ratifizierten Menschenrechtsinstrumenten? Drittens: Wie wirkt sich die fortlaufende Toleranz des Leidens derjenigen, die als rechtlos verurteilt sind, auf die Rechtsstaatlichkeit aus? Viertens: Da der Schutz der grundlegenden Menschenrechte sowohl den exekutiven als auch den juristischen Arm des Staates umfassen soll, inwieweit zerstört die reale Behandlung von Migrantinnen diese Brücke zwischen dem Politischen und dem Juristischen? Fünftens: Inwieweit können Migrantinnen als Versuchspersonen für eine umfassendere Zersetzung der Rechte von Bevölkerungsgruppen im Rahmen neoliberaler Wirtschaftspolitiken gesehen werden? Sechstens: Inwieweit tragen Regierungspolitiken und ministerielle Erklärungen, in denen mittellose Migrantinnen und Geflüchtete als Wohlfahrts- und Gesundheitstouristinnen sowie als Schwarm bezeichnet werden, zur Förderung einer in der Gesellschaft weit verbreiteten Rassismus bei? Und inwiefern sind sie verantwortlich für den zunehmenden Hass gegen Migrantinnen und Geflüchtete, was den Weg zur rassistisch motivierten Gewalt ebnet? Siebtens: Hat das Tribunal Beispiele des Widerstands gegen diese Maßnahmen gefunden, die als Modelle für künftige Maßnahmen dienen können? Vielen Dank.